Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Joe Begos. He is the filmmaker behind Almost Human, The Mind's Eye, Bliss, and VFW. His latest film, the holiday horror Christmas Bloody Christmas, is currently streaming now on Shudder. Welcome to the show, Joe.
How's it going? Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So one of the things that I'm always fascinated with is how filmmakers got into making movies. So what was your path to making your films?
It's one of those things where I just can't really remember a time when I didn't want to be a filmmaker. I always wanted to be an actor when I was really young, because I thought that they just made this shit up in front of the camera and I was 7. But at some point, I think it was even From Dusk Till Dawn or Desperado, 2 movies I was obsessed with as a kid, really young kid. I saw Rob Rodriguez's name as editor and director and writer and stuff like that and producer, and I was like, and then James Cameron, same thing. So I started to realize what those people did. And then, when I was around, when I started to realize that, I was like, well, I want to go to film school. And, I started looking up film schools, and then I transitioned into just making movies when I was 12 or 13. Cameras were $200. I got it, my big Christmas present. I want a camera, and I started shooting stuff. And I also started getting into or realizing the kind of way that movies like Bad Taste and Evil Dead and El Mariachi were made, because DVDs started coming out, and I was watching those things. And so it was this weird transitional period where, from age 7 to 13, I did that. And then when I was 13, I just started making movies, and I met Josh Ethier, who's produced all my movies with me. We met when we were 14 or 15. It's kind of just a blur now too. And he was a musician, and he had he just knew rhythm stuff. He knew computer program shit that I didn't know or care or anything about. So he came in, and we just became friends because of our mutual interests. And we kind of he started making movies with me, and it was just me and him making movies together. And we kind of assumed what positions we were good at. And then more and more people started coming into the fold. And I realized that, maybe writing wasn't my strong point, making stuff was. And my family, I'm not from a wealthy family or anything. I'm very middle class. So I couldn't really afford any good film schools, and I hate school anyway. So, and I hate writing. No, I don't hate writing, but I know I'm not a killer writer. I was never going to finish a screenplay or sell a screenplay. Sorry, not finish. So my thing was always all right, we just got to keep making shorts until we're good enough to make a feature for no money. And we just keep working towards that. And we're going to move to LA right when we get out of high school, go to LA. We just had, we just loved the whole idea of all of that stuff. And that was our goal. And we had this, group of 6 people, the effects guy, we're all going to move. Me and Josh were just continuing. We tried making a feature when we were in senior in high school, didn't get finished, thankfully, but we just kept grinding away, and we graduated. worked fucking shit construction jobs that paid good money, but you needed no education for, saved up some money for a couple of years and actually drove out to LA when we were like 20. All of our other friends had fallen by the wayside and they're like, good luck sleeping on a couch. So yeah, me and Josh came out here, shared a 1-bedroom for a couple of years, kept making shorts, took internships. I interned at Stuart Gordon, for free, doing like everything.
Oh, wow.
Doing my regular job, like riding my bike around. Josh interned for a working editor who was really good. And we just got to a point where like we started seeing or becoming friends with other filmmakers and going to festivals and seeing some of the really low budget horror movies that were getting bought for profit and released. And we were like, I think it's our time. So we got a bunch of credit cards and drove back to our hometown. We had like $26,000 in credit limit between both of us, and shot Almost Human in our hometown, which looks a lot like Maine. Got it in the can. We had $19 left to spend when we drove back to LA, and we cut the movie, used the edit to try and raise 10-15 grand to finish the movie, kept working our shit jobs, shopping the movie around, and it just got into the right hands and played at Toronto Film Festival, which interestingly enough, listening to the Cabin Fever commentary as a kid, Eli Roth's like, Cabin Fever I was a nobody, Cabin Fever got into Toronto Midnight Madness, and then you look and it's like, that's where Bad Taste premiered, Hellraiser premiered, Hard Boiled premiered, and it's like Saw premiered at fucking Cabin Fever. So to me, that was always like, oh, and somehow Colin Geddes, who programs the midnight movies that are used to for like 30 years, got his hands on the movie, which is a testament to him, because that means they actually watch fucking everything comes in, because I had no connections, and this motherfucker watched my $40-something-thousand movie, picked it for Toronto with The Green Inferno, Eli's big return to horror, and Lucky McKee movie, and it was like, oh my fucking god. And I was like 24 and went to Toronto and met Eli and met Lucky, and they like, it was just this really big whirlwind. But I put it was this weird thing where it's like, this is what I'm gonna fucking do, and I just built towards that for 10 years, and like somehow everything fell in the right place at the right time. And it was really interesting. And then from there, I didn't really take the route to, oh, I want, what's the next open directing job I can get. I very much was like, I'm going to make a telekinetic revenge movie, and it just sounded so cool to me. I never wanted to like back down from that. So again, it was almost like starting over. I had to go and put together money from like 18 different investors, because nobody wanted me to make the movie the way I wanted to do it. Put that money together, made that movie for, very low budget. Then went back and had to make Bliss for even less money, because it's just the private equity that allows you to do what you want is really hard to come by. You usually have to go to a production company or something like that who are going to kind of take over as their producers. I don't want to do that. I don't need that, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
Which is a fucking like hers.
It's so weird, because like Bliss was my introduction to your films, and it was one of my favorite movies. It might have been my favorite movie of that year, because it was like, it was so rock, it was so gritty and grungy, and just, I don't know, it was different than anything else I was seeing that year. And to be honest, Dora Madison is just fire in that movie.
Oh yeah, she's amazing. I think that the vibe you're talking about from that movie, I mean, that's very much like the world that I live in. And, like, I'm just, I'm always at fucking metal clubs. I'm up all night. Like, I sleep all day. It's just I work at night too. I mean, I'm not a fucking washed up, but it's just kind of like how I live. And like after Mind's Eye, it was so hard to find money for something. And also like I had done this thing with my first 2 movies where I didn't have a lot of life experience. So they were honestly just like, well, I'm going to make my John Carpenter movie, and I'm going to make my David Cronenberg movie, which, I was young, and that was kind of how I figured out how to make movies, but I didn't have a lot of experience. And after Mind's Eye and, making those movies, I did actually, like, between Mind's Eye and Bliss, I had so much personal shit that was horrible happen. And I also was having a lot of trouble making another movie, and I was like going broke, and I was maybe gonna have to like go back and get another, like go back to whatever I was doing before. And it was just this really weird time, and I was in a really horrible space, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to fucking put it all out there. I'm going to put my brand on film. I'm in this like tough position where everything's like kind of crumbling down around me, and I want to make a movie to reflect that. I was doing a ton of like a lot of hallucinogenic drugs at the time because of all the negative stuff, but also just to like try and trigger my creativity. And I was like, I'm just going to fucking write this movie, and it's going to be really boring to be a dude writing a screenplay in an apartment. So how about I have a chick in downtown LA who's doing a massive giant painting, because it's kind of the same art world. And I just spit it out at literally almost, I was going to be like, if I have to make this for 20 grand in my apartment, I will. But I was able to find a couple $100,000 to make it. And I auditioned people for it, and Dora came in, who I wasn't familiar with, but she was in Friday Night Lights for the whole show and in like all this sitcom stuff, and not sitcom, but like, network TV stuff. And she was really looking to break out of that, like whatever she break out of that, just like I was. Like, it's like, I want to break out of this rut of not doing anything and also like being known as this guy who only makes homages. I want to show you my fucking, all right, you want to see my brain, motherfuckers? Here we go. And like, so me and her kind of very much became like this organism that was like mutating through the production, because we had so much kind of like, fuck it, we're just putting it all on the table, I don't care. And I actually thought people were going to be pissed at the movie, just because of kind of like, especially at that time in 2018, it was a really like kind of touchy time. And I'm like, and it was like, should I make a really hardcore exploitation sex drug horror movie? You know what, fuck it, I don't care. I have a pure sense of how I'm going to do it. I'm not truly making something to exploit this. I'm truly making something that, and I think that purity actually came out and people recognize that, thankfully.
Yeah, that's what drew me to it too, was what you're saying makes perfect sense. There's definitely like the theme of like exploitation, like that kind of grindhouse type film from like the 70s, but there's also like it's saying stuff about art and kind of destructive power of like obsession. And I don't know, that's what really spoke to me when I saw it back in 2018. It seems forever ago now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because this movie I just finished this movie a couple months ago, and I always need time away, but I think Bliss is definitely my favorite and like most personal movie. And it's so funny because I have a lot of friends and collaborators who are like, you got to make another movie like Bliss, and it's like that means my life has to be horrible for like it's like, see, my life, I was in a good spirits when I wrote this, so now it's everybody partying and having fun, and then a killer robot shows up. Like, I can't, you know what I mean? It's like now, because I write movies from much more of a personal lens, it is very kind of indicative of where I am in life. So maybe if this movie bombs and I can't make anything for a year and a half, we'll get another Bliss. But
I don't want that for you, though. As much as I would love another Bliss, I don't want that for you.
Yeah, exactly. But life goes through ups and downs, so my life's not going to be gravy forever. So next time I'm in a valley, I'm gonna fucking pound out another angry angry
Well, okay, so we're talking about Christmas Bloody Christmas. Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about what the movie is?
Yeah, it's a grungy, neon soaked 16 millimeter killer robot movie set in Christmas. It's a really, really sleazy Yuletide yarn. Just straight up fucking, slasher. It's like a hangout movie meets a slasher with a fucking killer robot thrown in and a pornographic array of sensation and atmosphere. There's, thick, hot fog, haze.
Hell yeah.
Just every single aspect of the movie is over sensationalized. And it's just a fun hangout, crazy movie. Type of movie I wish I could have seen for 20 years.
I gotta say, this was a pure accident, but I ended up seeing it as like kind of almost a double feature with Gremlins, and I gotta say it worked 100%. Like, this definitely feels like the kind of filthy, violent, sleazy companion piece to Small Town.
The second movie in the double, if we were to line them up, it's a nice cap for sure.
Yeah. So one thing that is like jumped out at me every single time I look at your films is a lot of the same people get involved. Is it sort of like a big family reunion every time you make a film?
Yeah. Making movies is so fucking hard. It's fun. I love it. But I mean, it is a hard thing, especially, when on tight schedule and all that. So like surrounding yourself with people that you enjoy being around and who are also talented is kind of the key. And, I definitely like having the same people, which also has been something I've had to face, as only a couple of times, but like, as you get bigger budgets, for me, it's like the crew, the more we work together, the more we become this beast that all make each other look better. I'm talking crew and cast wise. I use a lot of the same crew in all my movies, and it's like the shorthand you have with those people allows you both to do better work, and you know each other more and you trust each other more, and growing together as artists, I think, is a lot more beneficial than like finding, I know a lot of people in this business, like they'll get a bigger budget and then something's like, well, I'm going to now get these people who are better. It's like, well, why not get the people who help make you where you are, and now they have the ability to fire off like that too. I made a movie before. I made one movie that I didn't write or produce, and it was like a fight to get any of my crew. And it's like, well, you want to hire me to direct, but you're hiring my crew too. And like, I eventually did get a bunch of them, and it made a huge difference. But like, it's the same thing with actors, and I just want to keep bringing people every time more and more until like now I don't have to actively find new people. Maybe it's nice to bring in a couple new actors, but I'd love to have the same crew every time, and I'd love to have the same stable of actors. And like on Christmas Bloody Christmas, everybody besides Riley and Sam was somebody I'd worked with before, or I knew on a personal level that I had, for all intents and purposes, written the role for. and I always knew that I would try and cast Tori and Robbie's role, but everybody else was like peppered in. And now Sam and Riley, for hopefully until they get sick of me, will now be written into all my other movies too, and just keep an ensemble.
You mentioned Riley, and I have such a crush on her. It was like she just is so good in this movie. She was like I was thinking back to in high school, like she would have been that cool alt chick that I would have been like puppy dog eyes and like following around school, because she just is so she's just so effortlessly cool in this movie.
Yeah, she's great. And as a testament to her as an actress, she's actually nothing like the character whatsoever.
Oh wow.
Which is when I saw the audition, I saw tons of auditions, but one of the scenes that I gave the actors in the audition was the Pet Sematary 2 scene, and she like had so much conviction in that scene, and it was like that was a big thing to me. Is it's like, can any of these actors convince me to feasibly watch Pet Sematary 2 along with all that? So like, she had this great fire behind that, and then going into the band stuff, although she made one, she's wearing a Van Halen 1984 shirt in our audition, even though her character shit talks in 1984. So that was my first part. I was like, no, that's interesting. But she was fucking amazing at that. And then when we did our follow-up, I like to riff a lot, and I like to allow the actors to help me. Like, we collaborate and kind of, we can organically build the scene. So I let her, I was like, I'll play Robbie in this, and I want you to riff with me. And she started riffing stuff that was like, sounded like I would have written it. And we had never met before. So, I mean, she was just so fucking good. And I could tell she was going to be really great in the role. And once I finally cast her, we started talking, and it turns out like she doesn't listen to any of that music, never watches horror movies, none of that stuff.
Wow.
So like, that was a testament to her. And then another testament to her as an actress is she completely immersed herself in the character. And like, I made like a 20-hour playlist for her that's what she listened to. She fucking watched every single movie that's referenced. So this poor girl who doesn't watch horror movies makes her fiance sit down and do a double feature of Blair Witch 2 and Pet Sematary 2. And I was like, all right, you're fucking committed. I
was going to ask, since she has some hot takes in this movie about Book of Shadows in particular and Nightmare on Elm Street 6. What are those favorites of yours?
Almost all of her pop culture opinions are mine.
Okay.
But for, Nightmare on Elm Street 6 is not. That's actually a dig at a friend of mine who has that opinion that we all consistently mock him, and that was like my joke to him. But I do love Blair Witch 2. I do love Pet Sematary 2, and Hellraiser 3 is possibly my favorite sequel. And Load sucks. Metallica Load sucks. I do like Super Unknown though, but Super Unknown I had to throw in there because of just the dichotomy of the situation. But I agree with the other ones. And Covenant isn't my favorite Alien installment. I wish I said Resurrection, because that probably would have elicited the same laugh. Taking out Aliens is arguably the best sequel. So I don't know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, she's very much an extension of me. And I was telling Mary Beth in an interview we did earlier that all my friends get the Pet Sematary 2 spiel where I'm like, well, you haven't seen Pet Sematary 2, and I've turned a lot of people onto Pet Sematary 2, and now it's my my duty. Every single person in the world who watches this movie is going to have to hear my Pet Sematary 2 spiel and hopefully seek it out.
I saw it for the first time. I want to say it was last year. Yeah, I think it was last year. I saw it for the first time, and it's surprisingly entertaining.
It is. It's good.
Better than it has any right to be.
I would just say I was like about to go into it and like just say the things in the movie just because it's like in my brain. Yeah.
Well, we talked about Christmas, Bloody Christmas, but I want to hear more about you and your introduction to horror when you were younger. Do you remember the first horror movie you ever saw?
I don't, because it's one of those things that's like, I just have this early memory of having seen these movies, and they're in my life because my parents had me when they were in high school. So I was very much, an accidental baby. But like when I was like 3 or 4, my parents are very cool. Like they have great taste. And this was like the height of the VHS era. So there would be tons of tapes that had, 4 or 5 movies on them, the long plays that they would tape off HBO and shit. And as like a 4-year-old who would get out of bed at 4:30 in the morning, I just learned to fucking use the VCR. So like, Drop Dead Fred, which is one of my favorite movies as a kid, was the first movie on a VHS tape that was followed by The Terminator and then Basket Case and then Christine. Wow. So like I would pop this in to watch Drop Dead Fred, and then the movies would just play. So like I have this memory of Phantasm 2, not 1. Phantasm 2, for some reason I watched like super young, and that was like my introduction to Phantasm. So like Phantasm 2, Basket Case, Pet Sematary, Christine, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, one a little bit, two for some reason was the first one, but like those in the Terminator, which you consider a horror movie, but like those are the like I just remember those always kind of being in the rotation. And they're like Christine and RoboCop. It was none of those movies really scared me. I think I was just so numb to it. But for some reason, there was this thing about RoboCop as a kid when I was like 4 or 5 that almost shocked me or scared me or made me feel uneasy in a way because of the violence. So like that was the first time violence actually. Like when Murphy gets his hand shot off, and I'm like 5. I'm like, why does this feel so dirty?
Yeah, that is quite a movie to see, especially at that young of age, because it's incredibly violent. Every time I watch it, because I don't typically go to see that movie, but like when I do, I'm always taken back by like how in your face it is with all the blood and guts.
Yeah, and it's weird because when I was that age, like there was a RoboCop cartoon, there was like a Rambo cartoon, and like all these R-rated franchises were like canonized for kids. So to me, and maybe my parents, I don't know, they like just like, you know, they had seen RoboCop, but to them, it's like a guy in a suit going around, and you know, maybe they're more desensitized to the violence. But yeah, like that scene where Murphy's killed as a 5, I'm like, this is the most shocking thing I've ever fucking seen. So yeah, it's been this weird thing, and then like I think that's why I was so obsessed with horror, because I became so desensationalized at a young age that like I just was always seeking out things. And then, you know, my dad on Friday nights, we would just go to the video store, and it's like 3 movies for 99 cents, and he'd always let me pick one out, and I'd always pick it based on the cover art, and he liked horror movies too. And yeah, so it was always just like it kind of sucks because I don't know if it sucks, but like by the time I was a teenager, I didn't really have any like classics to watch anymore. So it's been like this hard thing now growing up where there's not a lot of whole great horror movies coming out. And I've also kind of like watched a lot of the great ones. So like whenever I do make a discovery, it's so special to me.
Do you have an example of one of those discoveries that have like gotten to you recently, like a movie that scared you or surprised you, a horror movie specifically?
Yeah, scare. I don't know if I've never really been scared by anything, but one of the movies that I've watched recently that like I've just put on to everybody, I guess is maybe Death Game is the most recent one, which is actually what Eli Roth remade for Knock Knock. And Grindhouse Releasing just put out Death Game, and it was in the 70s. Sissy Spacek and Bill Paxton are like on the art crew. And Peter Traynor was a production designer, but like it has this, it fucking is so amazingly done. It feels like a creep show segment in the 3rd act, and like just this widescreen photography, and like it just looks and feels so lush and good, and like, you know, it makes Knock Knock look like, you know, a very 2000-esque thriller compared to this. But that's a movie that I'm like, I got the Blu-ray from Grindhouse Releasing. I saw it earlier when they were restoring it, and like I'm just like pushing it on everybody, and it's like it's definitely a horror thriller movie, but like that's one recently where I'm like, whoa. And I'm just glad I didn't see it when I was a kid, because part of it is like the widescreen photography and the way it looks, and there just hasn't been any on VHSs for a really long time. So that's definitely one of the more recent ones I've been pushing on absolutely everybody I fucking know.
Hell yeah.
That's cool.
I don't know if there's like any like actual straight up like horror movies I've seen in the past couple of years that like to me were discoveries. I just watched a movie Soul Survivor on Shudder that I'd never seen. That was really strong, that I'd actually never heard of. It's almost like a Final Destination-esque kind of thing where a girl dodges death and then she's having all these hallucinations. But it's not like a classic, but it's something I was like, oh, I haven't even heard of this until a couple months ago, and it's really fucking strong.
Yeah, I have that on Blu-ray somewhere. I haven't watched it yet, but I do have it somewhere in this room on Blu-ray, because when I heard that it was sort of like a precursor to Final Destination, I was like, well, okay, well, I can't remember who put it out. Someone put out a Blu-ray of it, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna get it.
Yeah, it's solid. I'd recommend watching it pretty soon.
That's cool.
Cool. So, okay, but Joe, what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
The 1994 techno horror, soon-to-be classic, Brainscan. One of my favorite movies growing up, and one of my most watched movies growing up.
Ooh, okay. So here's a quick synopsis from IMDb, everybody. A teenager is part of an interactive video game where he kills innocent victims. Later, the murders become real.
Uh-oh.
So, Joe, I want to hear about the first time you saw this movie, and why it is your scarred for life pick, and how it has affected you growing up.
Yeah, I saw this right when it came out on VHS. So probably, I know the movie came out in 94 theatrically, but it was probably around there. I, as a young child who at this point had already watched Pet Sematary 2 a ton, that was one of those movies that was on VHS and had like, you know, I just loved the soundtrack and all that. And Terminator 2 was my favorite movie. So as an 8-year-old kid, I looked up to Edward Furlong at that time. So, being at the video store and seeing, I don't know if I'd seen a preview for it or what, but, I saw Edward Furlong on the cover. and the new releases, with the fucking the static, and he's throwing a remote and this big TV, and it's like, oh, cool, a static TV, Edward Furlong, a horror movie, I'm in. And I don't know, that I'm imagining that was like, it was definitely an Edward Furlong thing. We ended up running. I watched it with my dad that night, and I think like it was so weird because right from the beginning, that was the first time that like a score stuck out to me in a movie, because the opening like theme is like, it's just a screaming guitar solo over this kid in a rainstorm, and I just remember like that being so effective to me and like drawing me into the movie. And then the reason that I was so obsessed with it as a kid, and like I soon, once I hit Cinemax, I had my dad tape it and I had it and would watch it all the time, is I hadn't at that point seen a movie that was like a character that I wished I could like be, besides maybe Edward Furlong in Terminator 2, so I could hang out with the Terminator. But now I was like, this dude, he's a huge horror fan. He's got this huge dope house by himself. He's got all this cool technology, and he's got this cool new video game that like, he's a serial killer, and he's like going to use his fucking, serial killer, like, his horror movie prowess. And he's got this best friend. He's got this hot chick next door who's also into fucking metal and horror. And like the whole entire movie was like, everybody's into metal and horror. And like, oh, there are characters. Like, it's the first time I saw a movie like that had somebody that like I thought I wanted to be, or I could be like, and I was always like so jealous of this kid who lived in this huge house with all this horror all over the place. And like, so to me, that was like always, it just stuck to me. And the imagery of that movie, like the POV shots, like I became obsessed with POV shots in that movie. That was my introduction to POV shots. Like obviously, you got Gaspar Noé and in Bliss, and this, you guys, the POV in the movie that I'm actually shooting right now, there's even more POV, and it's like becoming a thing that I became obsessed with. I think that was my first introduction to it. And like the whole idea of Edward Furlong going through and like that fucking one, quote unquote, one take murder was like, that was a movie that was a scene that just felt so gnarly to me. And then waking up and like, I had this petrifying feeling when I was a kid, like imagine if you killed somebody and like you didn't remember, like you didn't mean to, like you woke up and it's like, holy shit, I killed somebody else. So that was always this weird fear, and it influenced me. Also, I want to point out that John Flynn directed this movie, who also directed Rolling Thunder, one of my favorite revenge movies ever. So like the versatility of John Flynn, and also Lock Up, which is a really great Stallone kind of white knuckle prison movie. He did a lot of like kind of low budget but really, really tense blue collar Walter Hill-esque action movies early in his career, and he went out with Brainscan. Fucking love him. And it was written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven. And this was a wrote before Seven for a video company, or once he had sold Seven for a video company. It sat and languished, and then when Seven became huge, or was about to become huge, they rushed this into production. His original script was 150 pages and didn't have the trickster.
And
I can see what that movie was like, because like I was telling you guys earlier, if I'm rambling here going on too long, kneeling at the altar, feel free to cut me off. But when I made Christmas Bloody Christmas, we had this guy there who owned an art gallery, and he was super into horror movies. Actually was a fan of mine, crazily enough. And we just met. He lived on that main strip, and he was like, I've got a 14-foot screen here, 4K projector. I do screenings every weekend. You should program some double features through your shoot on your day off, which I did. And I would make the crew come. And we started off with Hardware and Terminator, like, all right, guys, here's what we're starting with. And then the next week was Brainscan. And I forgot what else we watched, but it was Brainscan. And everybody was like, what the fuck? Like, and it was so funny that everybody watched that movie for the first time there. And the entire crew had come from watching Everything Everywhere All at Once at the theater together to the art gallery to watch Brainscan.
What a whiplash that.
Yeah. And it was then watching it too, like when I was really sucked into it, but I started thinking, and it's like, man, it is true. If you took Trickster out of this movie, I liked him when I was a kid because he had that zany kind of serial killer feel. But like now looking back, it's definitely the weakest part of the movie. And it's just like, yeah, imagine how gnarly this would be if this whole movie was like his original script, where there wasn't a trickster and he was just fucking murdering people and being sucked into the hole of murdering people. And that was the story, because it's pretty fucking dark until the trickster comes up, and then it takes a whole other like vibe, and then he disappears and it's like dark again. And it's like, you could tell they inserted it, which, now looking back, it's like that's a weaker point of the movie, but it's like, fuck, what would that have been like?
It's weird, because I was watching this movie, and this was the first time I'd ever seen it. I'd heard of it, and I remember seeing the poster as a kid, but I've never seen it. But I was watching this and I was like, this reminds me of like taking an adult slasher and then slamming into it like Drop Dead Fred or Little Monsters, the little like monster under the bed. What was his name? Fred.
Yeah.
Movie from like the 80s.
Savage.
Fred Savage, yeah. And I was like, it's such a weird juxtaposition of having like this incredibly dark material and then this very fey kind of creature at the middle of it. It's a whiplash of a film for that.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, and I think maybe that's something I liked about it as a kid too, like darkness, because like I said, the darkness, I'm like, oh, I gotta just kill somebody. Then suddenly the trickster's here blaring Primus, and I'm like, yeah, you trickster.
Well, I think that kind of it like makes it almost in some way safer for a kid, because, you know, there is that sort of like fantastical element to it that I think kind of, I don't know, maybe not dumbs down, but maybe mutes kind of the actual horror of it in a way. So it felt like a kid's movie that also had a lot of fucks and shits and bad language and darkness. It was weird.
Which I guess is probably why I liked it so much when I was a kid.
Well, and I also like how this movie is like the latchkey kid movie, but with a rich latchkey kid who has like a huge house to himself and everything at his disposal. Because I feel like in a lot of like 80s and 90s movies, and especially those of us who grew up with parents who were working, like you were pretty familiar with like being by yourself quite a bit, and we see that in a lot of movies. But here, I think it's so interesting to see a latchkey kid, but like a really rich, privileged latchkey kid who's also very lonely. I mean, like his room is everything. He's got like that weird giant tube with all the bubbles. He's got, what, like, is that I don't know how to describe it. It's like an Igor type figure on his computer screen that talks to him.
Siri, 20 years before Siri existed. Like.
Yes, like it's so bizarre, but it's got this like, it almost reminded me a little bit of Dial Code Santa, which is that French Christmas movie with like a kid who sets Home Alone traps, but it's even crazier. And it's interesting looking at like that loneliness and how this kid is without a parent at all. And his dad is a voice on the phone. And like, that's all he has. And he's just a kid navigating all of these things by himself with other kids. And I think that to me, if I was a younger kid and had watched this, I would have been scared. Because I mean, like, again, even in horror movies, when there are parents, they're not helpful, but there is still a parent there. And here he is just a teenager on his own with like cops shooting at him. And it's just that in itself is scary. Just like the loneliness this kid is facing and what he's kind of expected to deal with by himself as a high school student.
And the feel of it too, like I don't know if it was shot in Seattle or Vancouver, but the entire movie is like overcast and rainy, which was something else, you know.
Yeah.
That was one of the first movies where I realized how much atmosphere or like even weather can add to the aesthetic of a movie. Like, you know, all the stuff that like is so obvious as an adult, but like, you know, there's certain things as a filmmaker or film fan that like just stupid little things like that I kind of, you know, remember latching onto it or seeing it in a certain movie for the first time. Not that that's the only movie to ever do it. It's just like the one that like, oh, why is it so dreary all the time?
Yeah.
In trees with rain everywhere. Like this looks cool. It's a place. There's a sense of place here, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also went to the POV shots that you talked about, because that was something I noticed a lot in this movie, that it's about like watching people, because you have like him watching the girl next door and taking pictures of her, and then she's also taking pictures of him, and then we have like the voyeurism of watching horror movies, and then we have the POV shot. And I think I'm a huge found footage person, so POV shots are always very exciting to me because I think it's so cool, like that technique. And so I was just really, and Terry, I know that you were thinking about this too, about the idea of like, yeah, this is Brainscan. It's kind of maybe a little bit silly, but there is some really interesting things going on about looking and how you look at people, people look at you and how you're seen. And even with the trickster coming out of the TV, which is very like Videodrome, like the thing looking at you, the thing that you're looking at coming out at you is just really fascinating in Brainscan. I was like thinking about that a lot while watching this today.
Also, it's kind of ahead of its time, too, because it also has the idea of, like, you know, the world we live in now where everybody does so much behind a screen and, like, you know, like, you know, you're watching people, what they do behind a screen, you're interacting with people, but, you know, you theoretically can hold somebody's life in your hand behind a fucking screen if you have the right, you know, so like, and it's usually just a lonely person. It's a lonely 16-year-old white kid in his fucking big house behind a computer screen, usually doing it. So I guess, you know, it kind of was ahead of its time. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I took the right route. I took the right lessons from Brainscan and not the wrong.
You know, it's weird watching movies as an adult when you don't have any like context for it. And so I'm watching this and I'm like, man, this is saying stuff about video games too. And then I started to realize that, this came out in 1994. And just like a year before, there was the United States, the Senate hearings on video game violence because of Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, and like looking at the moral panic of like violence in video games on youth. And so we're seeing this, and it's kind of an interesting critique in that, because like we have a kid who's very excited to play video games. And then when he's playing it, this is obviously not a video game that we're experiencing. It's real life. And it's almost like kind of critiquing that like there is a difference between playing these games and then actively going out and doing the crime and the murder and stuff. And so there's that element here that I think is kind of interesting, considering that it, again, 1994, right after everyone is wanting to ban video games and create a rating system and save the children.
Yeah. Which you probably lived like, I was younger when that happened, but yeah, I can't even imagine, people talk about censorship now, and yeah, I like have these vague memories of like Mortal Kombat they want a Mortal Kombat band. Like that seems so like innocuous now.
It really was. And I had specific memories of, Mortal Kombat, begging my parents to let me play it on the Sega CD, because I had a Sega CD and that was the big game. And I was like, I want to play it. And my parents were like, oh no, you can't play that game. And then I managed to like whittle them down and play it. It's like you start playing it, it's it's very pixelated, and then it's so miles below what they do for video games now. But that one, and then I remember sneaking Night Trap and playing it, thinking I was watching something or playing something so like salacious, and it's really just a B or worse grade movie that has a little bit of interactivity with it. But I don't know, it was a weird time to be a video game, like a young kid playing video games.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you're saying that. It's like you feel dirty playing something. I got the very last end vestiges of this, I guess, before the internet became huge, like as big as it does, when I was like a really early teenager. But like the idea of finding something or doing something that you're not supposed to doesn't really exist anymore with the internet, because everybody can see everything right away. But I just remember like going to horror conventions and like tracking down the uncut version of High Tension or like Cannibal Holocaust before they were actually openly available, or like finding these tapes at like my local thing that you couldn't find. Or yeah, like and I think maybe that's also what appealed to me partly about Brainscan, but like just like there was such a mythic quality to certain things that doesn't exist anymore because of the internet that I did get a little taste of. But yeah, like I wish that like that idea could have consumed a little more of my life, because it's something so cool. We can never get back to that place as much as I wish that we could.
No, and that honestly, it's like, you think, I was thinking, I always, whenever we're watching movies from that time period, I always think back to how I would have been, gosh, and that came out, I would have been 13 when Brainscan came out, and just thinking about like, you don't find things as easily as like you were saying, Joe, that you do now, where it's like, if you find Night Trap out in the wild, it's like, oh, you gotta somehow buy that, because now it's like, everything's so readily available. And you're right, it does lose that mythic quality of anything, really. The mystery is gone.
Yeah,
it's weird. But okay, yes, I agree that I think Trickster is maybe the weakest part in terms of like the movie, but also I think the performance, T. Ryder Smith's performance of Trickster is so deliciously camp and fun. I think he's a great performer in this.
Yeah,
his nails and his hair, like he really just feels like a hair, like an exaggerated hair metal troll, or like a punk troll that came out of your TV that like feels almost real, but it's just a little bit too weird to like actually feel like. It's like an uncanny feeling with the Trickster a little bit.
Yeah, I think the studio directive was like, well, make him like Freddy Krueger, but for the MTV kids.
Oh my god, he is kind of like Freddy Krueger for the MTV kids.
Yeah. They were definitely gonna make another franchise there.
But it is funny, like thinking about it even more now after watching it, and like the parts with him, especially when he's like sitting on his bed eating food, like putting ketchup. It feels very like ET-ish, or like kid finds weird alien friend, and look, they have a weird friendship now, and like they're BFFs, and it does not fit the tone.
Yeah, because then it seems like him brutally murdering his best friend.
Yeah, he's like, I made you kill, ha ha ha, and who pickles? Like, it's just so, it's such a tonal like shift. Yeah. It's wild.
He's sitting in a bed eating a raw chicken. It's like that image. And then yes, he's like, you need to kill your best friend, you need to kill this girl that you loved, you need to go kill, like it's it's just wild.
It's fascinating tonal shifts between that and him, but you can't get everything right.
But I can imagine how this would be. So did you watch this a whole lot as a kid? Because I can imagine this being like, if I had seen this as a kid, I would have been like, this is the movie I'm going to keep watching.
Yeah, very consistently. I actually almost wore out my VHS maybe because I don't think a DVD even came out till I was maybe like 18 or 19. Like it was a while before a DVD came out. So I had I had my taped version off of Cinemax, and I actually tracked down a VHS somewhere. But yeah, this and Pet Sematary 2, for some reason, it's weird. It's like, yeah, dude, I talk about these, some of my favorite movies. It's funny, I was on like the Pure Cinema podcast and we started talking about Pet Sematary 2 and stuff like that. And it's like, and then we just like one of this long Edward Furlong conversation. It's like, yeah, I guess I just really liked Edward Furlong as a kid, but he also did make some really good movies, And the thing about Brainscan that I was talking about earlier about like, that could be me, or like I'm seeing somebody who likes all the same stuff that I do represented on screen. That's something that I always wanted to do in a movie. It was like, oh, I want my character to be like a horror movie fan and a metal fan who's in a horror movie. And this was the first time that Christmas was the first time that like that made sense. It didn't really make sense in the other movies. Like Dora and Bliss could have theoretically been, probably wasn't a horror movies and stuff, but like just by the nature of the story, it didn't lend itself to like conversational items about that.
Right.
And, I don't think I was a good enough writer in my first couple movies. I was kind of just like, action, 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 So like as I'm growing more, I've been looking for like a place to integrate those characters that I would want to see on screen and the way that I reacted to those characters. And this was the first time I got to do that in a way that felt natural to the story and, make that hangout movie, make the characters interesting where I want to spend some time with them. And, that was why I showed the people up in Placerville where we shot, or like the whole crew, that movie. I was like, well, this is why this is important to me. And this is kind of where like, Riley, don't base your performance on Edward Furlong, but like, this is kind of like why I'm attracted to this movie and why I like that. So that is, in that regard, this was actually kind of a big influence on Christmas Bloody Christmas, of just finally got to do that idea I've wanted to do in a movie that I've held since watching Brainscan, or why I was drawn to Brainscan.
Yeah. What did people think? What did your crew and cast think when they saw Brainscan? I'm curious.
They actually, kind of like I was saying earlier, and maybe they opened my eyes to it, I don't know, but they were just talking about how interesting and good and like really kind of dark and nasty everything was until the trickster came on screen, and that really pulled them out of the movie. And yeah, then I started to feel like, oh, me and all my friends who talk about this movie had watched it quite a bit, and like starting at teenagers, when we were teenagers. So we don't have like, being an adult, being 35 or 40 and watching the trickster for the first time. It's like, yeah, that's, yeah, man, I could see mine. Somebody wouldn't really, appeal to that.
Well, it was also kind of funny watching this movie because I was getting, there's that scene towards the end where they start to like merge into each other. Yeah. And like he, opens up his jaw and is like swallowing the character, and there's all that kind of imagery in it. And I was like, man, this feels like a more kid-y version of like Daniel Isn't Real, Adam H.M. Orders movie, which kind of deals
to admit that he's a Brainscan fan, but I'm fucking calling him on
it. We talked to him, and I wish I'd seen this movie beforehand, because I totally would have brought this up when we talked to him.
It definitely like very, very, very similar vibes.
Yeah.
But like, I know that effects are cheesy, but I did kind of love when he came out of the TV. Like, again, it completely changes the vibe. It completely changes the tone. But I'm always impressed with movies like that have these like fascinating effects that, they might not hold up in 2022, but they're still really like impressive looking for the 90s. And it's just like, again, it feels like it's a different movie, but wasn't expecting such like interesting effects work, or at least like attempts at effects work with him coming out of television. I will say when Edward Furlong stabs Trickster and the weird CGI guts come and grab his hand, not so great, but that's okay.
Like lawnmower man level.
Very lawnmower man. Very. Well, I mean, like, this could be an episode of Black Mirror, you know what I mean? Like, or like, I feel like we've had similar episodes of Black Mirror. Like, again, this is another instance with the podcast where I'm seeing a movie that I feel like is so ahead of its time and predates a lot of things that we see even today in movies and in TV. It is really another really cool instance of being able to be like, look how cool horror has been from the beginning, and like, look at all the stuff that the genre was doing before everyone else was thinking about it. And I love that. I love having that experience in 2022.
Yeah,
it's really cool. So, Terry, is there anything else you want to cover with this, or do we want to wrap this up and start giving this a rating out of 5?
I think we've covered everything I wanted to talk about.
Sweet. Okay, Terry.
Yes.
How many tricksters out of 5 do you give Brainscan?
Oh, it's tricky. There's a lot to this that I really enjoyed. It definitely was like I was not expecting there to be so much weirdness with the almost camp trickster character popping in. So that kind of threw me off, but I was kind of vibing with it. And little side note, T. Ryder Smith, who played the trickster, would go on to, I don't know if either of you are BioShock fans, but would go on to voice Sander Cohen from BioShock. And that's pretty fucking wild.
Cool.
Love that.
I love BioShock.
But yeah, so I think this movie was darker than I thought, but also a little bit more safe than I thought. Like it has this weird balance because of the trickster character, but I had a great time with it, honestly. And I think I would probably give it like 3.5 tricksters. I would say I'm cutting one of them in half. What about you, Mary Beth?
I'll help bring the other one whole and do 3.5 as well. I think I'm finally realizing that I have a crush on Edward Furlong after seeing Terminator 2 and then this movie. Love finding these incredible younger actors who are in these kinds of films. Again, having never heard of it and getting it conflated with Brain Damage before I started watching it, I was very excited to see another take on a 90s video game movie. I'm a video game person, and I love watching video game adaptations of like movies of video games, which aren't always great, but I also love when horror plays with video games and the idea of video games. And this is another really cool early example I was glad to see. And it is way darker. And I wish more movies today put more kids in peril like this. I feel like 90s and 80s horror cinema really put kids in the shit in a way that I think was really scary. And I want to see more of that now, which sounds terrible that I'm saying hurt more children in movies, but I stand by it. I think it's scary, and I don't think it should be as taboo as it is.
Oh,
and
no,
yeah,
I'm lots of kids in movies. That's mine.
I'm just thinking of Christmas Bloody Christmas.
Yes. But yeah, so I think 3.5 with Brainscan. And then Joe, you have the final word. What is your rating out of 5? How many tricksters out of 5 do you give Brainscan?
I feel like 5 is egregious, so I'll go 4.5.
Okay. Understandable.
But if I was of the age of my peers here who had seen it, I think I would maybe be closer to the 3.5 range. But I'll go with 4.5 because it's very, very important to me.
Do you watch it all the time? Does it come up a lot in your viewing habits?
It's one of those movies, and the reason I wanted to put it on and show my crew is like I have a handful of comfort movies that I watch when I'm shooting, because like I'm just so fucking, my mind is running, and it's like, so I don't want to watch anything new. And there's like movies that just make me feel good when I watch, and that's definitely one of them that I watch all the time. I have a rotating, not a rotating, but pretty much every time I make a movie, I watch the same things. And then I don't make a movie every year as much as I want to, but even if I'm not making a movie, I'd say it's definitely a yearly watch. And if I come across anybody or become friendly with anybody who hasn't seen it, I make a screening, an imperative, mandatory social event in their near future. So
Hell
yeah. Wait, before we wrap up, what are some of your other comfort movies while you're shooting? Now I'm curious. I watch Beavis and Butthead. Like I have all the episodes of Beavis and Butthead that I watch. I watch Brainscan, Tales from the Dark Side, the movie.
I love that movie.
I was actually close to picking it for this, but B was closer in the list. But Tales from the Dark Side is like my favorite anthology horror movie, and I say that as a massive fan of Creepshow. Creepshow is only brought down because of the cockroach segment, which I think is okay. But when you have those first 4, Tales from the Dark Side is like fucking banger after banger after banger.
It's amazing.
And so like that's another one that I watch all the time. Boogie Nights, I'll put on.
Oh, cool.
Phantom Thread has recently come into the fold just because it's like a bedtime movie. Like I don't know, it's like a warm blanket that you put on watching it. And that's the main group of movies that I'll put on. And just put them on, I'm like laying in bed trying to go to sleep.
Oh yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for joining us and talking about Brainscan and putting that out in the world. Where can listeners find you? And are you able to talk about the film you're working on right now? The floor is yours to plug away.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I'm not super active on either one, but I'm poking around quite a bit. And the movie I'm working on, trying to make it short without getting too, an over explanation, but I started making a movie before Christmas. Everybody was making COVID movies like on Zoom and on shit like that on phones, and I was like, well, I want to make a COVID movie. You want to see a fucking COVID movie? I've got 16 camera packages. All my crew and cast are my best friends. I was like, let's make a fucking COVID movie in my apartment. So I have a cool looking apartment. I have a lot of space in here. So I wrote a movie that I was really happy with and wanted to spend my time making, but was so fucking overly complicated. We were supposed to shoot for 30 days. We got to 50 days. Everybody started getting jobs again because COVID was starting to clear up a little bit, and Christmas got financed. So we shot a few more days, and then I shelved it for a year because we had such a quick turnaround. And once we got back, we started to get back into it again. I actually started shooting again the end of last week, and we're shooting now, hopefully going to finish before the end of the year. But because of COVID and how ridiculously expensive SAG was, I star in it. And it's with my buddy Matt Mercer, who's in Christmas, and he's in a couple of my other movies. And it's really insane. It's like if Gaspar Noé made Brain Damage with a bit of fire in the sky.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it's a really hardcore psychedelic alien abduction movie with lots of gore. And I play a coked out filmmaker who's abducted by aliens over and over again. And my friend gets abducted by aliens over and over again. It becomes a psychotronic nightmare with lots of neon, animatronic aliens, explosions, NASA-style astronauts, people coming out of paintings.
What the fuck?
Yeah, so as you can see, it became, and we have a crew of like 5 because it's tiny in my apartment, and we don't have a lot of money to spend on it, and so we're trucking along, but we're almost there. But yeah, it's gonna be fucking something.
Hell yeah!
But now we're gonna release it in like 2024 and be like, well, here's my COVID movie. I'm actually 3 different numerical calendar year ages so far across the movie because we started shooting in at the height of COVID, and now we're still shooting. So so hopefully, when we cut it together, it's not like, why is Joe 2 years older in this shot? And then this was, I got a bunch of nice face creams. I'm getting sleep. I'm like, all right, let's see if I can restore my face to 2 years
Hydrate,
ago.
keep drinking water.
Yeah, cut back on the drinking. Let's get some expensive face products, and let's hope for the fucking best. If not, we'll shoot a lot from the back. All right, and follow me around. Strap on that POV camera, man. The next scenes are gonna be
found footage now, and I'm the cameraman.
Yeah, the opening scene is like this 5-minute unbroken shot, or we did some trick photography, but it's a POV enter the void style shot of me getting abducted by aliens. I'm watching a horror movie, smoking weed, partying in my apartment after I just got a movie shit canned because and then everything, the lights start strobing, all the neons are fucking blasting out, and then I get ripped up to the ceiling and it's fucking aliens. It's fucking insane. That scene alone took like 4 days to shoot, but
I want to see this right now.
Well, hopefully that'll be done soon, and we'll be in the fest circuit in the spring or summer is my hope. I'm gonna finish this before I get another movie, or else I'm gonna be like a 6-year fucking age gap in the goddamn scene. So.
It's like Linklater's Boyhood, except with aliens and weed.
Well, see, my age gap it's a hallucination. I'm seeing myself age throughout the film.
I love it.
Okay. So listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Brainscan? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm Gailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
Oh, dude, I didn't even know that was you. I know your handle on Twitter. I didn't realize that was you.
Yeah, that's me. Please send us please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we're on Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the Somebody please think of the children.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is the briefing room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.